Let's go ahead. Thank you, Juan. So, all right, we may have some more folks who trickle in, but let's just, in the interest of time, go ahead and get started. So, thank you for attending. This is our November 2021 webinar, and today we have a speaker who is one of the OGs of the CTN Familia, as well as the Palo Alto faculty. We have Dr. Rafael Castillo, who will be talking about culturally relevant pedagogy. I'm going to turn it over to him. I'm also going to drop a resource that he highly recommends into the chat. It is an article by Gloria Lanson Billings at the University of Wisconsin. And Dr. Castillo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, Maria and Aaron, for doing this webinar. I'll be talking about culturally relevant pedagogy, and some of the material that I'll be covering has been done before in Austin, in El Paso, San Antonio, Corpus, other places. So before I begin, I want to let you know I'll be using a PowerPoint. So I'm going to do this right now. And I'm going to be covering a lot of old stuff, and then I'll move into the new stuff. So you can see how we transition from the old stuff and then moving into brand new stuff. All right. And in between, I'll stop and I have a little 5-minute presentation at the end. It's a little video that covers a lot of this cultural relevant literature. All right. So let me move on, share screen. It's coming. And can you all see my screen? Yes or no? Yes.
We see a Zoom window. So yes, we see.
All right, good. Let me move on and start immediately on it. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Let me begin. Yeah. So this is a little presentation on cultural relevance and basically on cultural relevant literature. And a lot of the material was collected BC, meaning before COVID. So a lot of the material is, you can see that, and we'll start immediately. All right, so one of the things we ask our faculty members when we do these workshops is, what do you think when you hear the phrase culturally relevant as applied to curriculum building or pedagogy? And normally a lot of people think like, well, culture, like high culture, middle culture, low culture. So it's a very broad term, but it's borrowed from anthropology. So we all have different cultures. We come from, maybe some people have the culture of up north, the culture of maybe the East, the culture of the West, South culture. So culture is such a broad term. And what we try to do here is apply it to our neighborhoods, especially to the culture of our students and the culture of reading. Sometimes they read things different than what we read things. And sometimes their use of vocabulary could be a little different than our use of vocabulary. I always tell my students that I know that years ago, I understood what youth culture was because I was younger. Now, as I get older, I still am familiar with it, and I try my best to become knowledgeable about that. So let me continue. So we're going to start with theory. What is this theory we're talking about? And I've given you some readings about that. I'll pass it out to Aaron and Dr. Chavez so they can pass them out to you. And I'll have some more things to talk about that. Let's get on with this. So what does Merriam-Webster define definitions of culture and relevant? And what I do here is, and we don't have time for this, if we were face-to-face, I would assign this to you guys to do. And everyone would get into small circles and they'll write down what they think of culture and what they think of relevant. And then we try to come back again. This would take like maybe 10 minutes. Then we'd come back again and we post them on boards so everyone can read them. And then we would assign members in every little area to read them out loud. But we're not doing this because we're doing this digitally, all right? So culturally relevant means, of course, relating to the arts, language, beliefs, and of a particular group or people. And it also means the rising up of a nourishing environment. And that's the key I want to talk about, this nourishing environment. That's one thing we need to do, and one thing we all do in our classrooms, we nourish them with new ideas, we make them read out loud, discuss those ideas. But this course, this particular workshop deals with getting new materials into the classroom. And I'll talk about that. All right, so the theory that we talk about is taken from Gloria Ladson-Billings. It's called the theory of culturally relevant pedagogy. And it's been around for a while, and she is kind of like the originator of that. It's a theoretical model that not only addresses student achievement, but also helps students to accept and affirm their cultural identity while developing critical perspectives that challenge inequities that schools and other institutions perpetuate. And that's really what we concentrate on. This particular pedagogy concentrates on student achievement, and it accepts and affirms their cultural identity. Because every little group all over Texas has a certain identity, certain belief systems. And let me give you an example. I know growing up, a lot of the readings that I did in Chicano literature in Texas were a lot different than the ones in California, because they would pronounce words a certain way, I would pronounce it a certain way. So by doing this, we understood that there were tiny micro differences in how they did things. But it didn't lessen the fact that we both knew them. So then we begin to accept and affirm that particular identity. All right. And the next thing is sometimes we have to look at this critically. And the critical part is knowing the differences, not in a negative sense, but in knowing how differences operate. And then we understand them on how schools and institutions perpetuate these differences. Let me give you another example of that. When I was growing up as a young man in school, there was a key term that was very prevalent among all educators. The idea that I was coming to school, the sixth grader, seventh grader, eighth grader, and that I was culturally deprived. So we came to understand, well, what do you mean by culturally deprived? The idea was that, well, we didn't know about Mozart, we didn't know about art, we didn't know about the nuance of languages. So in a sense, we were deprived. But I took it to mean, a lot of us took it to mean as culture, meaning, well, the culture that I come with. So that's the difference here. And as we've gotten older and a lot of us have gotten educated, we've now reassessed that. We're reassessing that. And more young people became educators. And not only did they challenge it, see this word here, challenge, the inequities, they began to introduce their own theories. So she is one of the innovators of that. And there are more that are continuing this particular field. So Ms. Billings' theory of culturally relevant pedagogy, 3 prepositions regarding culturally relevant teachers. Number 1, the concept of the self and others held by culturally relevant teachers. Sometimes we as instructors, we have our own ideas of what is culturally relevant. What can we introduce into the classroom to help them see differences and to help them grow, all right? And number 2, the manner in which social relations are structured. Everything we do in the classroom, I tell my students, we all carry different personas. The persona is a Greek word for the mask. We have, right now I've got my educator mask. I'm giving a workshop, and it's different than the mask I wear when I'm with my friends or when I'm with family. So we all have different manners in how we interact in our relations, all right? And then the last one has to do a lot with epistemology, the theory of knowledge, the concept of knowledge, how knowledge is perpetuated and how it's disseminated and how it's questioned. So I'm not going to read the entire paragraph, but she's got this on page 483. Rather than add-on versions of multicultural education or human relation courses that serve to eroticize diverse students as other, a culturally relevant pedagogy is designed to problematize teaching and encourage teachers to ask about the nature of the student-teacher relationship. Secondly, the curriculum. Third, school, and then the nature of society. So we're looking at critically, intellectually, how these things operate and how students can become aware of that themselves. Okay, you notice that where it has the other day I was filling out a form and it had a lot of listings. It was a government form and it had a lot of listings on there. And students had probably gone in through that already. They understand. So what I decided to do is look at that very carefully. What does it mean? Is that, are you this? Are you this? Are you this? Or are you other? That's where that idea of the other comes from. Because there were little boxes that you would sign off. And unfortunately, in the 60s, the 70s was very, very prevalent. So you either, and there were hierarchies. So a lot of people didn't understand the hierarchies. But some people started questioning, saying, well, what does this mean? Why is this N at the end, this other at the end? So by putting these hierarchies inadvertently to the mind of who's ever reading it, they've already establishing an order. And this order puts the other at the bottom. Instead of being like this, it's like this, down. Now, who do we have to blame for that? Really, Aristotle, who put everything in topographies, everything in categories. So it's not, and I don't think Aristotle had any issue like, well, I'm going to put everything in this order, this is top. Well, no, it was just basically how he as a scholar put everything in categories. So it's okay to do that. You have fish, different categories of fish. You have different categories of trees. You have different categories of flowers. You have different categories of food. You even have the food hierarchy, little pyramid. So students begin to understand that there are implicit hierarchies everywhere. All right. So this particular person, Billings, began to see this and then applied these same principles to pedagogy. All right. Let me continue. So this is the article that what I have done is I placed it with Dr. Chavez and Aaron so that they can make copies and download it to you guys. This is a culturally relevant pedagogy 2.1. It goes back to the original piece and it talks a little bit about how educators have misused it, how some have added to it, and how and she wants to go back to how it originally started. What she started doing was she started listening to the music because you can get a lot from the music. The music is what kids want. The music is what they're listening to. And kids nowadays have a wide variety of music, and they understand what's going on. So that's the big culture. That becomes culturally relevant because that's the kid culture. That's their culture as Gen X, their culture as millennials. My culture would be boomer culture. And I always get a big kick out of it because the students see that as they don't see any value in it, but they do know that boomer for some can be negative or it can be positive. So I said, it's okay, don't worry about it, all right? So let me continue here. So here's some evaluating some preconceptions. We have to return to the ideas you generated. I use this after the participants go back to their little tables. Remember, this is BC, before COVID. We had all these workshops that we would do, and people would be in their little groups and we would generate these ideas about culturally relevant pedagogy. Then we would return and we would begin to assess that. And then we discuss which ones have been affirmed and how have they been affirmed. And then we ask the people in our workshops, what have you revised? How has your notion of culturally relevant pedagogy has been reanalyzed and reaffirmed or revised? And we gave the participants like 10 minutes of time to revise it. And then they would put their answers on bulletin boards. So instead of doing that, I'm just telling you that what we went through. So this is the old stuff. Now I'm going to start with the new here. So this is the CTN culturally relevant curricula. So involves three things. Number one, primarily it's a quality curriculum, and we have it, we pass it out all the time, which seeks to create change. That's the key, change in a positive way. This is all we try to do is do things in a positive way, where students are imbued with literature that reflects their community. And it becomes problematic because a lot of faculty don't know, excuse me, Professor Castillo, where do we get this literature from the community? Where can I find that? I've been to Barnes and Nobles. I asked, do you have any literature about San Antonio? And they give me all these history books. But I want to know, where is this literature that we can get from the community, from our students? I'll be showing you that in just a minute, because I want to go through the old stuff that we used to do, which I think it's still relevant. I think it's still relevant, and I still use it. Number two, CTN's Ascender program fosters culturally based readings with close identification with underserved student populations. That's a key understanding. Who are the underserved students? These are your first generation. I was an underserved student because I was the first generation. And the whole world to me was entirely different than what was going on in the college curriculum and then the high school curriculum. But I was learning. That's one of the things I was learning. And let me tell you, I majored in English because I fell in love with Shakespeare, with Chaucer, with the 18th century novel, I just fell in love with that. So for me, learning literature was basically from like looking at a huge cultural house, and there are windows and I can see in. I look inside and I'm like, wow. And I want to become part of that. But later on, as we become older, we reflect, and now we see this literature as a mirror. You begin to see yourself in it. So these two constructs, the window to literature and the mirror to literature, are really, really old constructs. They're not new. This is not something I invented or anyone invented. These are old constructs done in the 18th and 19th century. And now it's still with us now, like the allegory of the cave. These things are still with us now. We still utilize them, we still use them, and we still learn from them. All right. And the last one is pedagogy, teaching. That's a Greek word. The pedagogues were Greeks, they're the Greek teachers. And we as teachers are the pedagogues. And of course, we use a certain style of teaching, and it's across disciplines. And we recognize that writing is a process. One of the things I tell my students is that not to worry when you respond to a reading that you have. Don't worry about the grammar. Just get your words out there. Get as many ideas as you can. So I teach them to get everything from their head on paper. Don't worry about the spelling or if it's incorrect, because they're learning a process. And once they have that, then I tell them, okay, now we're going to go through a process, all right, a process. And this process uses textual strategies that enhance writing and develop critical thinking. So all these three are implicit in the curricula that we use. And I've used to much success these three underpinnings of what we do in our classrooms. Now I'm going to show you some old material that we have used. I know some of my colleagues in Austin have used it to great success. And I was there to observe them. And I was very impressed with how they implemented a lot of these materials into their classrooms. So let me show you this, okay? Before I do that, let me talk a little bit more about the concepts. All right. One of the things that we do in CTN is self-reflection. I think that's very, very important, because this way is a way for you to understand, are they getting the material? If they're getting the material, what are they doing with it? How are they reflecting? So self-reflection means it gives a chance for reflects readers' experiences and students to see themselves and their backgrounds reflected in the literature. And in a minute, as we continue this, I will show you some great pieces of work that you can use in your classroom that will show the students this culturally relevant literature, and they'll begin to understand, you mean my culture is relevant? Of course it is. Your culture is relevant, and it should be used to teach these concepts. And these concepts are very general, and I'll talk more about the concepts in a minute. Number two, it allows students to reflect on the assets. Notice assets, cultural capital, what they have to give. And we all come into a classroom with cultural capital. What that means is that we all have something to give, all of us. Every individual has something to give because that person is a human being and he has something to give. What we do now is open up and try to see what is it that that person is giving. The next thing we need to do is to see global awareness, because this is not, this village is a global village. It involves all of the entire world. And texts that connect to us in the community allows us to appreciate other experiences. And that's very important because I connected to the world of Shakespeare as a little kid from the barrio. I connected to that. I saw kind of portions of myself in the characters, and I like that. So, and I appreciate it. But rarely did I really see images of myself as a protagonist until later on, after I had graduated. It was right there, and I really did enjoy it. I'll talk in a minute about one particular book that really influenced me a lot. Let me continue. So the last thing is to provide a springboard for critical analysis, research, and extended writing. This is for our students, extended writing, for them to start. And I'm not talking about honor students or students in advanced courses. I'm talking about my INRW courses. I still teach INRW courses. And I think that is my bread and butter, because I like these courses because these students come to us with some little deficiencies, academic deficiencies, but I like to see them grow. And as they grow, they take on a whole different demeanor. And later on, after a couple of years pass by, they'll come back to me and they'll say, I really enjoyed your class. I saw what you were doing. I really enjoyed this reflection business. I really enjoyed the idea of popcorn readings. It made me appreciate this type of reading. So sometimes when you feel that you're in the classroom and they're not paying attention, or they are paying attention, or maybe you feel like you're like drowning in the sea of all these protocols, there is hope there. There's always students who will tell you, hey, I really appreciate this and I got a lot out of this. All right, here are the books. Here are the books that I want to talk about. And some are old. Some of them are old, and some of them now, and I'll tell you where it's used. The top one, Between the World and Me by Tahatsni Coates. And of course, it was put out in 2015. I have used that book. Uh-oh, somebody has a hand. Yes? Oh, yes, I will share the PowerPoint. Sorry. Okay, going back to this, Between the World and Me, I have used this book for my English 1301 classes. But let me tell you about this particular book. It is written at a college level. It is a very visceral book. It's very tiny. It's a letter to his son. And right now, it's very apropos to what's happening right now, and it still is. Mr. Coates writes for the Atlantic Monthly. It's a regular writer. And I shared his material with a lot of our students. And a very dense book. And the way we read it was chapter per chapter, section per section, reading, asking questions, going through it. The next one is Brian Stevenson. It's called Mercy, Justice. And that particular book I used again in 1301. In a minute, I'll get to the INRW, because that's my bread and butter, okay? So this particular book It's culturally relevant. It deals with the type of justice we have now, how some people get 50 years for an ounce of marijuana, while other people get 30 days. And it talks about the criminal justice system. Now, the reason I used it, because at Palo Alto, we had a lot of criminal justice majors, and a lot of them. I would ask them, what's your major? Criminal justice. What is your criminal justice? So I figured, I'm going to use this book. And I got a lot of positive reaction from this particular book. I don't use it anymore because I've moved on to other texts, but I always have it ready in case the student wants to do some extra credit. This particular book has been made into a movie. So if you do use it, just remember it's made into a movie. So sometimes, I'm not saying all students, they'd rather see the movie than read the book. It's a different type of medium, but it's there. The third book is one of my favorites. I've used that in my CTN INRW course, Intensive Reading and Writing, and that's Reina Grande. She's got a new book. This is called The Distance Between Us. And that particular book is culturally relevant because it deals with migrants. It deals with people migrating from Mexico, crossing the border, and then making a new life in the United States. And Reina Grande talks about herself there. It's her struggle moving from where she lived in Mexico and had to go with the coyote, and they travel all through the countryside, cross the border, and go into the United States. And all the expectations she had of this new country, she became a naturalized citizen, and she also won awards for her writing. It's a very, very gripping book. And it made a lot of my students cry. They were reading it, and some of them said, "Sir, I am very touched by this chapter." And I said, "Well, let's read it out loud." And let's all read it out loud. We would read certain sections out loud, and then they would write. And then when we brought her to Palo Alto College, they asked me, can we ask her questions? Of course you can ask her questions. Can we ask some serious questions? Say, yes, you may ask serious questions. Whether she'll answer them, that's up to her. And the students did ask serious questions about that. So this particular book is a very eye-opening book. It's very thin. It can be read in a day or two. I know I read very, very fast. But for our students, it's written at that level. I would say if you're reading at 7th grade, 8th grade, this book would cause no problems at all. It's very, very simple. It's kind of like reading Hemingway. Hemingway is very, very simple. All right, the Old Man and the Sea, same period. 7th grade, 8th grade. All right. The next one is one of my favorites. She is a San Antonio poet. And that is the people from the community. Lorianne Guerrero is from the Palo Alto College community. She went to Palo Alto, she lived in the community, and she won several awards for her poetry. So I use a lot of her writing in not only INRW, but in English 1301 and 1302. One of the reasons I use it, because a lot of students will ask me, "Sir, I like reading this, but you ask us to do our paper. Can I do Edgar Allan Poe?" And I tell them, "Yeah, Edgar Allan Poe is good, but you can read it on your own, but we're going to do our papers on Lorianne." Let me tell you why I do this, because a lot of my faculty, we talk about this. And one of the major problems we have, and I'm not saying it's all students have that issue, but for us, sometimes plagiarism is a little, it becomes like a problem. Because, students are students, and I'm not saying that all students are going to plagiarize, they're not. But there are one or two that will probably do that, unbeknownst to they don't do it maliciously. It's just, that's the way I did it in high school, and here's my paper. And you can tell a lot of them are cribbed from outside sources. But when you do a paper on a poet in your community, There's nothing written about her in the community. There's no critical analysis you can find. So it's all fresh. So that's where I use a lot of the material because it's fresh. I'm starting to see a lot of my ex-students put their essays online. So slowly I'm deciding to remove some of the poems that I use because you'll see 7 or 8 articles online already by my former students. All right, the next one is Rupi. I like Rupi, and I'm going to tell you how I found out about Rupi. It's a book of poems called Milk and Honey. And let me tell you about Rupi. Rupi, of course, was recommended to me by my stepdaughter when she was in high school. And she asked me, could you buy me this book? What book is it? Is it Shakespeare? I says, no, it's a book of poems. Oh, good. Yeah, I'll buy you a book of poems. What is it? And then she told me the title. So I went over to Barnes and Nobles and I approached the lady. I'm looking for this book. I went to your poetry art and I can't find it. So I figured it's one of these self-published. So it's okay. I don't mind as long as I read them and I look at the quality. So I went, she said, oh, yeah, you want Milk and Honey? Yes, let me go to the front, to the checkout desk, and they're there. Oh, okay. So I went to the checkout desk and I said, I'm looking for Rupi Kaur's Milk and Honey. He says, how old is your daughter or your son? It's from my daughter. How did she know? I said, she's 16. Okay. We have a lot of copies here. And these copies sell out within a month. We order 500 copies and they're gone within a month. And they're usually junior high kids or high school kids buying this poetry book. So I said, oh my God, 500 copies in a month? So yes, we can't keep stock of them. They buy them. So I said, okay, let me read them. So I started reading them and I could see that maybe it would have a trigger warning in there, because it is about feelings, it is about family, and it is about love. So, and it is about family love and outside love. And it's typical 15-year-old writing about what she thinks the most. Well, this was a long time ago. So now she has made millions of dollars from that particular book. And she has her own YouTube, and she's written several others. So that's a very good book to read, but you really got to read it before you assign it. All right. You'll be surprised. Some of your students may already know about it. They'll tell you, oh, yes, we have it at home. So that's talking about the cultural relevance of the students themselves, the millennials, their material. And that's one of the things we as teachers should be able to do, is try to read what they're reading, try to see what they're seeing. And a lot of times they're into the music, Bad Bunny, which I never heard about until now. And of course, the other one called, I'm trying to remember, it's from South Korea or North Korea, one of the Korean areas. And a lot of the music is very, very catchy and it's very positive. There's nothing negative. There's no negativity at all. The only thing is it's Korean rap. So a lot of the kids are listening to that. All right, let me continue to the next 3. The next one I use, and I recommend that highly, especially here in Texas, is David Montejano's textbook. And Professor Montejano, that particular book, it's a very dense book. It's like 500 pages. And one of my students, who's right now here at Catch the Next, asked me, are we going to read this entire book? Yes, we are. It was close to 500 pages. So we trudged through it. We read sections through it. And I asked the students to get involved by doing PowerPoint presentations on each section. So it can be done. It can be read. It is an experience, and it is very eye-opening. The next one is Rodolfo Anaya's Bless Me Ultima. I know somebody will say, my God, that's an old novel. It was published in 1972. I read it when I was in my freshman year. Yes, it is an old book. And I have great news to tell you folks. In 2022, the Library of America, which is a very prestigious area. It's a very prestigious company that puts out all these books for Americans to say, these are the books, this is the canon. This is the canon that we want you to read. And they always include Mark Twain, they always include, and they're leather copies. Well, I just got word from the Library of America, because I emailed them, I talked to them, and they said that they are producing the first Library of America edition of Bless Me Ultima for 2022. That's 60 years after the novel was published. And that particular novel has become a classic, even though it's been banned in certain areas because of language. It's got tiny little bad words. That's it, but there's no sex and violence, no killing, none of that. It's just the language a little bit. And there are copies that you can get where it's been edited out. A lot of them have been edited out. So that's how you go around it. But in a college curriculum, I don't see any problem with using that particular text for culturally relevant. Bless Me Ultima. All right. The last one is a nonfiction. This is called Whistling Vivaldi. And the school that used it was in Austin Community College. They were using Whistling Vivaldi, Claude Steele. And I remember sitting in one of the instructor's classrooms and enjoyed her participation, her use, how to introduce these culturally relevant texts into her classroom. And this was one of them that we got. Let me give you some examples from it. Oopsie, something happened here. Oopsie, what happened? There it is. There it is. It says here, using Steele's Whistling Vivaldi. As part of the culturally relevant literature, we selected Whistling Vivaldi as a common core text to teach students tolerance and understanding of all forms of stereotypes. This is about stereotypes. And what you can do here is stereotypes affect all cultural groups, no singular culture is exempt from the stereotypes. That's the beauty of it. These stereotypes are equal opportunity. They affect all of them. So the purpose of Steele's book is to empower students to understand cultural underpinnings of identities and to learn to strategize, counter stereotypes, and deal with institutional and group dynamics. Now, let me tell you what he means by institutional. Some of these stereotypes have been institutionalized. How? They figure, well, if you're dealing with X number of students, we done research that this particular student has a culture of poverty, they do this, they only do this, they probably have food stamps, they do this. So already there are some identities associated to that particular group. So we talk about that. And here's a student learning objective here. The purpose of reading Whistling Vivaldi is to enable students and encourage them to understand all the aspects that make up their own identity. And what are these aspects? Number one, race. There's no escaping that. There's no escaping that because it's in a lot of our identifiers. When you make an application at a bank, when you go do some type of government form, it'll have all these markers. So it's already institutionalized. So no one can say, Professor Castillo, what do you mean institutional? It's already there. I can bring you forms and show you how it's already in there. Number two, disabilities, social class, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, all right? So all that sometimes has already been institutionalized, as well as that of their peers. Even their peers will begin to do that. So once this particular book helps them see both advantages and disadvantages. The title takes its name. How we got to this title, Whistling Vivaldi, you kind of wonder, well, Vivaldi, isn't that a classical composer? Yes, it is. And I've listened to a lot of Vivaldi works, the four seasons. And I'm not talking about Rudy Valli's Four Seasons. I'm talking to the classical works of spring, autumn, fall, summer, They're very, very beautifully done. And it says here, the title takes its name after Steele developed a strategy to diffuse potential threats or perceived threats as an African American encountering white Americans in a dark street. Because that can be very intimidating. It can, for a lot of people, it could be, a strange encounter. So he started developing these strategies to diffuse them, and he put them in a book called Whistling Vivaldi. And this is the main part of the book. It says the whistling of a classical tune seemed to lessen tension and fear because it expressed and projected a college-educated African American in a non-threatening stance. That's the thesis of the book. I just put that in there. That is the entire thesis of the book. That's what the whole book is about. But within the book are various strategies, definitions, ideas, historical notations. So it's a very, very strong book, and it was used by myself, by people at the ACC, Austin Community College, used it for a while. So hence, Claude Steele used a stereotype to counter another stereotype as a strategy. So Steele called these identity contingencies. And I remember being in class with one of my colleagues, and she used that phrase, identity contingencies. And she asked the students to approach the board and start writing, giving their types of contingencies on the line. And I was amazed how she took a very difficult book and made it very easy to learn, very easy to learn. And the students at the end of that class told her this was the best reading they've ever had. All right, let me move on. All right, so these are some writing exercises that I observed that people have used, I have used on writing exercises on Vivaldi. Number one, defining stereotypes. What are they? How do they function? What is the purpose of the stereotype? What does it do? Can it do internal harm? All these things. So students take out paper and write down major stereotypes that they see among themselves, that they see of other people. And I know this is real general. I wish I had, but she had a handout, but I couldn't reach her to get permission to use it because I don't like to use material that belongs to another faculty member, and I have not been given permission to use it. That's why I didn't use it. So I kept it as general as possible. So students take out paper, write down major stereotypes. The third one is introspection, where they begin to write bad stereotypes of one's identity. What are the type of bad that you have about yourself that you think it's out there? So they start writing them down, and then we start talking about them. And here's an example. What are the qualities of being old? And sometimes, well, they're slow. They can't hear. They move slow. They go, ah! I'll try to do that myself. Or they don't understand. Or they're stuck in their own ways. So what are the stereotypes for the young? They're rash, they don't think, things like that. They begin to talk to themselves about that. What are the stereotypes for rich, for poor, for male, for female? So we begin to list them, and the students begin to understand, oh, now I know what it means. And then we break out the word stereotypes, the Greek word, what it means. And Steele does that in that particular book. It's well worth it. It's not a thick book, like 500 pages. Very thin, easy to read. So let me continue. Here's some additional questions that we gleaned from that particular thing, process. So how do these stereotypes say about how we view people? That's the thing. What do they say about how we as humans view other people in our segregated society? Claude Steele argues segregation remains a major feature of American life. It's sad, but it's there, and the stats are there to prove it. Well, what stats are you talking about? Pew, P-E-W. The Pew stats are there. I know that if you would ask Rogelio demographer, he would probably give you some stats about it also. The 2015 census shows that the average white American lives in a neighborhood that is 80% white and 7% Black, while the average Black American lives in a neighborhood which is 3.3% white and 51% Black. The same thing goes with the suburbs and the schools. It's always connected. If you look at your school, and all of you have a statistician in at your college, you can ask for the stats. The stats are there. So it's not like, Professor so-and-so is saying this and it's not true. It is true, it's there. All right, so being born into a low-income Appalachian family in the hills of Eastern Kentucky is to take life from a different location in society's opportunity structure than being born in a high-income family in the northern suburbs of Chicago. So there are differences. There are differences in opportunity, differences in reading, differences in wealth, and all these differences have an effect on our society. So sometimes different locations afford people different resources, different access to, quote, social capital of skills, knowledge, opportunities, and life changes. And sometimes even your zip code can give you, it's a determinant to how much you will pay in insurance. And the students already know this, because I asked them when we talk about segregation and its effects, when we talk about all these stereotypes, I asked them, do me a favor, try to find out what is the cost of your car insurance if you live in this zip code, if you lived on this zip code, that zip code, and this zip code. So they do it as an experiment. And they are surprised when they find out, oh my God, it's higher on this side. Why? Ask yourself why. And then they start thinking, oh, because of this, this, and this. So the critical thinking is embedded into all these little questions. Another one is the price of food. Sometimes, even though right now the economy is, inflation's going up, sometimes certain grocery stores, we found out, have higher levels of prices at certain times, certain weeks of the month. And the students found out why. They found out why. Sir, that's when my grandmother gets a Social Security check. We noticed that 3 days before the price goes up, and about 3 days later it went down. So why is that? So they can charge more. Okay. So all these things are implicit in there, in these ideas of segregation. All right, let me continue. All right, now Praxis, a sample assignment. This is just a sample assignment. We're not going to do it. It's just for you to see, so you can see what normally goes through these. Let me continue. I'm trying to move as fast as I can. I'm not going to read this. So these are just introspective question and discussion question. And this is the book that we use. I'm going to move on. So I'm going to talk about another thing from the community. Usually what I do is I like to bring pan de dulce. You know what pan de, sweet bread. So one of the textbooks that I use is Jesse Cardona's book of poetry called Pan Dulce. So what I ask the students to do is to read the poems, look for strong lines, reflections, and writing prompts. So what I do is I bring a box of pan dulce from the neighborhood Mexican bakery, have students select their sweet bread. I bring paper, napkins, paper plates. And then I ask students to use sensory description to describe their treats. And by now they know what sensory description. They got to smell it, feel it, taste it, see it, or hear it. So usually the hearing part's kind of low. And I ask students to examine their treats, and I tell them, before we eat it, I tell them, take a picture. And they're already used to it. I'll take out the little cell phone. They take little pictures of it, all right? And then once I assign a student to read the poem aloud, and then they discover the names as metaphors. So what a way to use a culturally relevant text here to teach metaphors. And let me show you what I'm teaching. Here's some examples of Mexican bread found in panerias. The first one is a marranito. That means a little pig. So the food is shaped like a little pig. It's shaped like a little, I wish I brought one. I ate it, okay? Another one is a muela. It's shaped like a little tooth. Another one is a concha. This is a concha. The one in the photograph, that's a concha. Some people call it something else. And then you have a cuerno, a polvorón. These on the side is the English translation. An oreja, an ear, a pierda, a rock, a nudo, a knot, a novia, a bride. And of course, the most famous of all, the pan de muerto, Day of the Dead bread. So usually for Halloween, you can bring that and you can talk about it. All right, let me continue. This is another one that I use from Lorianne Guerrero's A Tongue in the Mouth of the Dying. I know I'm running out of time, but I want you to see that this is a poem I use, and it's a poem about what? So the students read it, and they try to guess what it's about. Can anybody tell me what it's about? Just curious. Hey, chat. All right, I'll tell you what it's about. Oopsie, I'll tell you what it's about. It's about lengua. She's talking about lengua, and what the students do here is they divide the poem into two areas, and then we discuss how traditionally lengua is made. Barbacoa is made. They dig a hole, they steam it, do it for a day, leave it there, and it's steamed out, and then they talk about the butchered heads. I know it sounds kind of icky, but I had one of my students say, "Sir, this poem is about a vegan who's kind of afraid to make the lengua." I said, "Yeah, how did you know?" Because a lot of the negative words there at the bottom: murderer, butcher, tear, carnage. So that's good. That's good. So that student on his own used critical thinking skills to divide the poem up. All right. There, oopsie, there you go. So this is the book. Students read quietly and then select one poem from the collection. The poem is from a slide. It's used in all my INRW classes and my 1302 classes. And then I use a 5-minute presentation on Lorianne. I have a little video from YouTube. Anybody can download that video. Now, here are some notable books that I've used for INRW and English writing classes. I'm going to start at the bottom. Sandra Cisneros. That's a very easy book to read. You can find it in any Barnes and Nobles, and it's fiction. These are tiny short stories that you can use, and the students kind of read through them. They're very short reads, go very, very fast. The next one, De Colores Means All of Us. That's a collection of nonfiction. It's an analysis of patriarchy, of the early social movements of the Chicano movement and all the movements in Texas. And it covers that very well. It's by Elizabeth Martinez. The next one is Gary Soto. That's a novel called Nickel and Dime. The next one, City Lights from Upside Down. This is brand new, just out last month. I reviewed it for the Express News. I reviewed it for the program that I belong to, National Book Club, and we reviewed it. And this other one is a maze of short stories that David Martinez. These two are local people, Alex and David. They're local, they're people from the community, and they've got their short stories. This is a collection of poems by Terrence Hayes, who used to be editor for the New Yorker. Excellent sonnets, all 14 lines, beautifully done. The next one is by Julia Alvarez. She's a poet. This is her little novel. I use a lot of Julia Alvarez's poems because they deal with everyday life, cleaning houses, doing your laundry, hair. It's very easy to read, and there's a lot of positive reinforcement of the culture of the community. And the last one is Mexican Gothic. It's a novel written in the vein of the Greek tragedies, and it's about kind of like Medea, but it's about more Oedipus Rex than Medea. So if you know what I'm talking about, you read the ancients, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And here's my ending. This is research material that you could use in your classes. I mean, for yourself, not for the students. These are writings that you could use yourself. You can use the first one, Vatos, Bolillos, Potros, y Pelados. This is a textbook by UT Austin on different type of cultures and seeing. The second one is called Tejanas, 300 Years of History. It covers women, particularly women, the last 300 years, how they have contributed to Texas history. The third one, Brown Tide Rising, is the use of metaphors, where you can teach metaphorical thinking. It's a great book. I've done a lot of research using it. And the last one is just my own. This is culturally relevant too, but I teach a lot of Greek literature. And I like to use this particular book by Richard Caldwell. It's a very strong book. It's nonfiction, it's an analysis, and I use it. And this last one I left out because I know there would be a lot of people from South Texas. This is a memoir from an individual from South Texas, Domingo Martinez, who wrote a memoir called The Boy Kings of Texas. And it starts with a song, a corrido, and it's in Spanish, and it's got the translation. And then the individual goes into talking about his life. A lot of my students read that in conjunction with reading Reina Grande, because I had a female memoir, and then I had a male memoir. So you could see two different lines, two different trajectories, how different they were. And then I asked the students which one did they like the most. And they would tell me, I think I like this one better than this one. The only thing I have about Boy Kings of Texas, you do need trigger warnings because there is the language part. With Reina Grande, you don't need trigger warnings. It's very easy to read. It's a very compelling book, very visceral, and it's a very strong book. All right, folks, it's 4 o'clock. I'm going to stop right here for Q&A. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I did all the talking. Let me finish this.
All right.
Thank you so much.
So a couple of comments. I know Anne mentioned that the SNF students read Castillo's book, Children of the Land, and Troncoso's work on Nepantla familias. We got the copies through the Real Reads program in the Texas Book Festival. I know that there are always incredible authors, especially local authors that come out every year through the Texas Book Festival. Are there any questions? I know we're right at 4, but I wanted to see if there were any questions or comments. Oh, neat. And Anne, you were able to incorporate interviews with the authors as well.
That is excellent. When you have interviews with the author, I think that speaks highly because the students begin to understand the structure of interviews. That is great. And I congratulate you for doing that. That is great.
Oh, wasn't my doing, actually. I have to thank Lydia C. DeBaca Cruz for organizing it all for all of our Ascender students, and the person with Real Reads too. Excellent.
Oh, yeah. Wow. So I'm always glad to hear when I hear a lot of our faculty are incorporating interviews. I've used interviews very successfully for my INRW students. They wanted to know, how long is the interview? How many pages? And I said, between 10 and 25 pages. They kind of looked at me like, is he crazy? But then when they started doing the transcribing and everything, they came and told me, sir, I got news for you. I don't have 10 pages. I don't have 20 pages. I have 35 pages. And they were all cheering themselves happy because they asked a lot of questions and some of the authors gave long, long answers. So when you had to transcribe, it came out to a lot. And I said, look, you got 11 pages, single space. You got to make it double space. It's got to fill into this. And a lot of them did that. And some of the material they did is archived at the Palo Alto
oh, wonderful.
Poetry Center.
Mm-hmm. Well, Troncoso, as you know, is from Isleta. So he writes a lot about that.
Great.
Yes, and he's also one of our scholar mentors within the Catch the
Yes.
Media.
Yeah.
So wonderful. It just highlights the incredible talent that of writers that there are in South Texas in particular. So, all
And they're
right,
giving back to the community.
very much so.
Mhm.
Very much so. I know Rafael had mentioned Lori Ann Guerrero, and I know she's still very active in the San Antonio community, and constantly doing presentations to schools there. So,
I have to remember that.
yep. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. If you celebrate and want to wish everyone happy Thanksgiving, Dr. Chavez has put that in the chat as well. And just a reminder, we will not have a webinar in December. We will pick up again in January with our series. So, Dr. Castillo, thank you very much for imparting your wisdom to us, and we will see y'all very soon.
Thank you.